Uh, we'll just dive right in.
Cool.
What's going on, everybody? I'm here with Trevor, and I'm really excited about this conversation. It's been in the works for a little while now. I've had some scheduling conflicts, but it's all good. I'm happy to have you here. Uh, it's I'm glad to see you're doing well.
Thanks.
It's been a little while because we met at Baltimore Comic Con. I thought we had some really good conversations there,
Agreed.
and it's nice to have you on here. So
Yeah,
how
dude.
are you? How
I'm
are you?
good, man. Thank you for having me. It is a privilege to be one of the first couple people to sit down with you for your show, and it's gratitude as always, man. It's a blessing when anybody wants to talk to you about your work. So thank you for having me.
I'm happy to have you. Thank you for considering me being worthy of your time to do
Oh,
this.
please, man. It's a pleasure. It is a real pleasure, man. No worries.
All right. So, uh, you are here to talk about Helix Project. Well, Area 51 Helix Project is the full official title,
Hmm.
right? So you are here to talk about that, but I do like to have a little like icebreaker moment, and I just kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. See what you're reading right now, if anything, and we'll kind of just go from there.
Yeah, I just finished It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth by Zoe Thorogood, which was a lovely, lovely on a different sort of metric. But it was just a beautiful work, just very honest, and a really, really great execution on how to develop like atmosphere for a book. It's just it was sort of avant-garde in many ways, but very much in control, uh, sort of the reader emotionally, and by the reader I mean me. So I really did enjoy it. I think that was it's a great book, and Zoe Thorogood is a pretty tremendous young talent in the game, who like, man, I feel like people give me a lot of credit for being where I'm at, given my age, and she, I think, is like a year younger than me at least, and just doing like work that is absolutely out of this world. So, that was fantastic. I'm about to jump into a reread of Descender, so I'm really stoked about that. That'll be after I finish The Invisible Republic by Gabriel Hardman and Corinna Becco. I actually I picked up this book because I was like having a Twitter conversation with Gabriel Hardman, because I was like, I really liked your Green Lantern Earth One. Like, is there any like what have you done independently? And he had mentioned this title that he did through Image a couple years back. So I bought the first two volumes, and most of the way through the first one, and it's been pretty good.
I'll have to keep an eye out for that one. I'm not really familiar with it, but
Yeah, man.
that's
Yeah, it's interesting. It's about like this disgraced reporter trying to uncover the truth behind this regime, or maybe this like dictatorial regime that had ruled on this moon that is now crumbled and just recently collapsed in present day, and it plays out like these two sort of timelines of how the regime was built and then falls, as he begins to uncover more of the documentation. It's an interesting read for sure, and he has a really smart use of color palette throughout the book. So yeah, I'm having a pretty good time reading it.
that's awesome. Yeah, no, I definitely want to check that out. That's cool. Um, all right. Well, I mean, that's all stuff that I'm not. I mean, I've heard of Descender, but I haven't personally read it. But like that's all like new stuff to me. So like that's kind of cool. It's a different answer. Um,
Yeah, like I think each of those books, like between It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth, Invisible Republic, and Descender, are nice because you have like It's Only at the Center of the Earth, which is a contained singular graphic novel. It is pretty like emotionally intense, so if you're not prepared for that, I might wait until you read you're in a position where you can. Descender is massive. It's like, hold on, it's like 5 volumes
yeah.
that then branches out into a sequel series called Ascender, which is 4 volumes,
Right.
so the whole story is 9. It's toothsome, but it's excellent. It's Jeff Lemire, Dustin Nguyen, I think it's a masterclass on how to do a long spanning story in comics. And then you have Invisible Republic, which I think is a total of 3 volumes. So it's got a decent amount of body to it, but I think is very readable, very conquerable.
Right. I just went on like a little Twitter spiel the other day about how I think, because I just recently finished reading Middle West by Scotty Young
Uh-huh.
and Tom Taylor's Seven Secrets.
Okay.
And both of those books, I mean, I really enjoyed them, but both of those books are 18 issues apiece.
Mhm.
And you can see behind me, kind of, I got some books, it's them. So like, uh, but yeah, 3 trades for both books. And I'm like, maybe this is like the perfect like issue count for a story to not be like too short, but not like be too long and dragged out.
Hmm.
You know, like maybe that like 3 trade range is like the sweet spot.
Yeah, it could be. I think it totally depends on the team and the legs of the story. Also, me
Agreed.
throwing up the horns was that, like, I just noticed that you had an art print
Uh,
from the
I
Helix Project back there.
I put that up on purpose. I was like, all right, I got this from. I haven't gotten a frame for it yet because I'm a piece of shit. But I mean, I have it up. I figured you'd appreciate that.
I do 100%, man. I
Yeah, no,
have so I
I love that cover.
oh, thanks, man. I adore that cover too. I'm like, now that we're like getting to the end of the series, I'm beginning to have a little bit of a panic attack because I'm like, which one of these covers do I put on the trade? And do I commission a new one? But these covers are so good, it's like, do I even need to commission a new one? And could that money be spent like on new projects, or maybe adding a cool new feature to the printed product, So
Right.
it's like I'm kind of between that one and Sam's issue 6 cover, which I don't know if you've seen. It's the one with like the faces kind of
Yeah,
spread.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, no, I mean, personally, I don't want to try to sway you, but like as a consumer, I think it's nice to have, I mean, like an original cover is cool, but having like an existing cover kind of creates some like familiarity there, and like
mm,
you kind of know what you're grabbing when you pick it up.
yeah.
So, and
No,
plus, I
that's
mean,
I think that's
go
good
ahead.
input. It's really good input from the consumer, because I always wonder what people's preferences are, and that was where I was leaning towards. So it's good to hear.
Right, yeah, that and uh damn, I lost my train of thought. Oh well. Anyway, so all right, so you're that's what you're reading right now. That's really cool. My other question is, I guess it's kind of twofold. Who
Mhm.
is your favorite writer and your favorite artist? And if it's a duo, like that's an acceptable answer. Like I know that I have a buddy who's like big on Brubaker and Phillips, and like as a duo, like that might be his answer, but at the same time, like individually, they might not be like his favorites.
Mm,
So like,
that's fair. That's not a bad pick. I mean, I gotta go with the God, Alan Moore. I know it's
mm,
not an original answer, but I think he's the GOAT. I think he's the best to ever do it. I think you read a variety of Alan Moore stuff, and oftentimes it reads like an entirely different person wrote every single one of them, and for
mm,
them all, and for pretty much everything, not exactly. And there are certain things that are not for everybody, and certain things where maybe he gets a little bit too out there, but most of his comic book projects are executed on the absolute highest level, and to do that with such a variety and depth of style that you it almost comes off like it's written by an entirely different person is just like insane, like it's one thing to be really, really good at what you do, right? Like to be a Brubaker, to be like the crime comics guy, but like you read all of Brubaker stuff and it's Brubaker, right? Like that
mhm.
signature is very much there. But to be able to read Alan Moore Swamp Thing or V or From Hell or Watchmen or Tom Strong, and for them all to feel so singular in the best way possible,
Right.
like and identifiable, that's insane. Like that is insane. And just the amount of layers, that goes into constructing his work. I mean, you can read Watchmen. I read Watchmen at least once a year, just to like pick the new thing out of it. Now I have to be in a mood. I got to be in a particular place. But there's always something to be taken out of what he's constructing there. So for the writer, it's got to be more.
That's fair. I know a guy who swears by Alan Moore as well, and he does the exact same thing. He reads Watchmen like once a year. I don't know if he's got like a schedule or not, or if he does the same thing you do. It's like, all right, now's the time. But yeah, he reads it every year and says he picks up something new like nearly every time.
Every time, especially as a creator, just there is a complete grasp on how to, for a lack of better terms, how to do comics from a lot of his work, and so it just gives it that depth, and that density to study. When it comes to artists, man, that might be harder for me than picking a writer, just because sometimes it's like different moods, and I think I sort of have different classifications. Like when it comes to superhero stuff, probably Gary Frank. I think like I just don't think anybody draws superheroes as well as he does. And he's still a phenomenal storyteller. Sometimes you get those guys that are amazing figure drawers and do these incredible pinups that will absolutely blow your mind, and they're probably the most likely thing for you or I to put on our walls, but aren't like phenomenally great sequential storytellers, and that's not the case for Gary Frank at all. Master the craft. But when it comes to man, when it comes to variety, like sometimes I'll go like a David Mazzucchelli. He's a master of I mean, like so here's the thing. My take is that David Mazzucchelli might be the best comic book artist ever, but I don't think we got enough from him in a medium that is very much defined by being a periodical and like having a volume of work for me to like confidently give him that title, when you have some guys that are putting out a monthly book for 20 years and nailing it every time. But in terms of like the absolute mastery of the craft, I think David Mazzucchelli might be the greatest comic book artist ever. But sometimes I'm in a mood and I'm like, I definitely am one for like shouting out people who are like rising, who are currently in the game and are killing it. I've been a big fan of Anand RK, who's a frequent collaborator of Ram V. I think his work with John Pearson in Blue and Green is like some of the best comic book art I've ever seen. Nonetheless, something that's come out in the last 5 years. It's brilliant. It is really smart in how it handles the structure of the artwork, in that there are some moments where you have these incredibly well-defined lines and shadows and textures and colors that lend to elements of realism, but within the same book you'll have some moments where like the pencils and the colors are so much more loose and impressionistic that it's all emotion, it's all feeling, and it's no structure at all, and it's executed in such a way that it's the combination, the fluctuation between highly structured and not very structured is just like, man, it's just an incredible reading experience. It conducts the reader along the reading experience in a very special way. So I've been really digging what he does. Super versatile. But man, yeah, to pick, man, like I said, oddly enough, even as a writer, I think it is harder for me to pick like an all-time favorite artist. I think sometimes it's flavor of the week. You could ask me in 2 months and might have a different answer.
I was gonna say, I really think it depends like what your like preference is in terms of like genre. Like you said, like Gary Frank's really good at drawing superheroes, but like if that's not where you like lean towards as a reader, then like you might say someone who does like, I don't know, like noir shit, or whatever. I guess it really depends on what you're feeling at the time, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes I'm like, hey, Samuel Iwunze, the guy that draws Area 51, the Helix Project, is the best, like I say that somewhat sarcastically, but he's great. As you guys can tell by that cover in the back there. But yeah, man, it really does change. And it sometimes it depends on what I'm working on. Like I just got man, I just got some beautiful pages back for the next thing that I'm working on. And they're a combination of watercolor and colored pencil, and they're beautifully animated, and when I look at that, that's kind of the mood at the moment. So it changes, man. I'm giving such a non-answer, but
I mean, you listed three people, so like as far as I'm concerned, that's an answer.
yeah.
But okay, cool. I mean, no, those are all quality. I respect it. And so we can get down to business now. Talk about Area 51, the Helix Project.
Hell yeah.
So I mean, first things first, when did you start writing this? Like when did this all start coming together?
Somewhere like middle to late 2020. I had at the beginning, like right before the pandemic, I was interviewing at Marvel for an editorial internship while I was in school. And I had it had ostensibly seemed like I had gotten the job. I got a call back, and it was just a conversation of, listen, we're going to talk logistics, pay, schedule, at some point, in the near future. And then like inside of so I interviewed the week that like hand sanitizer and toilet paper was selling out everywhere, and I was in New York City as it was happening. And
Yeah.
so I was just like, I didn't know what to expect. I'm just like, I get to interview at Marvel Comics. Like I'm going to school for molecular biology. I did not think I was going to be doing this. And so that happened, and then we went on lockdown, and about a week and a half to 2 weeks into lockdown, I get a call back from Sarah in their HR department, and she was just like, hey, we're still thinking about you. Problem is, we're not in the office, and we don't know when we're going to be back in the office, so we can't bring on new personnel. They were like, in fact, there are some people who are going to be furloughed on the low end of the editorial totem pole. So that was just kind of the situation, and I moped about for a couple months. Rightfully so, I think, that the apocalypse very much upended a lot of people's lives, and then I was just
Yeah.
like, you know what, I'm not going to ask for permission to do what I want to do. So I had this inkling of an idea that I had never really done anything with, because I never thought I was going to write comics. That I think I guess it would have been like the summer of 2020 that I really started working on, and I never looked back.
I mean, that honestly, and like 10 years from now, when I mean, wherever you want to be, I don't know where your goals are, whether it's, 135 successful Kickstarter campaigns, or you've got a deal with Image and Boom, and like you have something licensed to be a Netflix, but whatever your goals are, like 10 years from now, let's say that happens. Like this is the crazy like story for you to tell when it's people ask you like how it all came together.
Yeah, and I tend not to lament the situation anymore, because all I think is that the Helix Project probably wouldn't have existed if I was, working in editorial.
Hmm.
And it is, I commend the great editors out there, because it's a thankless job, and they're hard. Like a great editor is incredibly hard to come by, no matter where you are, big to
Yeah.
indie, it doesn't matter. But I really am glad that I got to, uh, you know, begin to make my footprint as a creative voice in the industry. And I mean, it changed my life. I mean, like I said, I was going to school for molecular and cellular biology, and I, certainly had concerns about just being miserably cooped up in a lab, listening to pretentious people talk about how cool it is that they, have MDs, and now, I get to play in all these different sandboxes, and I get to express these kind of complex thoughts and ideas through, you know, these really incredibly different characters. And you know, like I said, it really is a joy.
That's awesome. So technically speaking, this campaign, which by the way already launched, we're already knee deep in this shit, uh, is for the sixth and final issue of this story. It's one big, complete, you know, self-contained book. This is really like your first work.
Mhm.
And I know one of your like selling points for your progress as like an individual is that this is the worst thing you've ever written.
Yeah.
And like it's cool though. Like I think there's a lot of healthy optimism in that sentiment.
Yeah.
So yeah, so issue 6. I mean, the big finale, and I've got the books here. I I'm already in. Like here's issue 1. You know, I admittedly I haven't read all of them yet. I'm still only up to issue 3. And here's a close up of that 5th issue. Like you see the poster in the back, but like look at that cover. It's like so edgy, but like not in the obnoxious way. Like it's cool and intricate, and I love it. And if you made that the cover for your trade, I would not be mad about it. I mean, that's not to, you know, disparage the other covers. Like everything has like quality to it.
Thank you, man.
And speaking of quality, the actual I mean, I have this one. I'm not picking favorites, I swear. But like, the actual quality of the print is good. I don't know who you guys are going to, but like they're on the ball with that. And that as a backer speaks volumes to me. Like I think that's awesome because it means that you care about what you're putting out. It means that like you want us to have a quality product, which we're getting. So like if you're worried about whether or not, you know, if as a potential backer, if you're worried about whether or not this is going to get fulfilled, I don't think he, you know, I don't think Trevor's out here giving us 5 books already just to hoodwink us for the last one, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I listen, as I want people to read the end of this story more than anything in the world, man. Like you know, it's been a wild ride, and one in which I've gotten to connect with a lot of different people who have taken a lot of different things from this story. And I think it's only fitting that I have to give you the ending. You know what I mean? Like I could have been
Right.
living out of a cardboard box and been like, you know, in the like on the computer in the library and been like, back this Kickstarter, you know, I'll make this 6 book on printer paper if I have to, you know, despite the fact that I'm not, you know, still high quality print. But yeah, man, it's I'm stoked. I'm stoked for people to get into this finale. And the cool thing is, for anybody that hasn't gotten in on it yet, you can buy the whole series right then and there on the Kickstarter, and with some gorgeous cover art and interior art.
Yep, I agree. And so that's what I did. I didn't discover this book until the most recent campaign for issue 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to just get them all in one shot. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm in. I got them in a timely fashion. I can't remember if it was on time, like off the top of my head. I don't really care, but I got them in a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, if you want all 6 issues, because this is the first you're hearing of it, you can get it. I recommend it. I read the first 2 issues. At this point, I think I'm going to save the other 3 for when the final one gets here. But I like it. I need to see where this goes. I mean, I don't want to say, oh, there's so much going on, but like there feels like a lot of potential, and there feels like a lot of depth to what's happening. But speaking of what's happening, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book for those who might not have read a single page of this?
Sure. Yeah. So Area 51, the Helix Project, is a sci-fi thriller about a boy from 2 worlds who's forced to excavate the trauma of his past when a mysterious figure puts his father's murder into question, and being driven to uncover the circumstances surrounding his father's murder, he's dropped into the jaw of this Cold War genetics conspiracy and ultimately forced to face a twisted ghost from his past that challenges everything he knows about himself and what it means to be human. So it's super personal. It is ripe with genre storytelling. It's very rare that I think people get to read sci-fi with actual like legitimate science woven beneath the science fiction, and it only gets sort of more involved in that way, I think, in a good way. So it's not just fantasy but with blinking lights and metal. It is sci-fi, and I've always taken to the sort of high stakes drama of thriller comics or thriller storytelling in general.
Mhm.
It's funny, when I was so sort of ignorant when I first marketed the book. I was like, it's a sci-fi noir. And then David Pepose, who's on Savage Avengers right now, gave it a read and kindly gave me a cover quote when I reprinted my first issue and
Oh
called it a
wow.
sci-fi thriller. And I was like, oh, actually, David's right. This is way more of a thriller than a noir. Look at what I know.
Yeah, I mean, from reading the first two issues, like there's absolutely some noir vibes,
Mhm.
but that I think that is a more apropos description for the book.
I'd agree. David helped me market my book. Yeah.
That's awesome. Shout out to him.
Shout outs
That's
David, man.
yeah. So I mean, where'd you come up with the name for the book?
So funnily enough, speaking of marketing, the original title of the book was just The Helix Project. Um, you know, I knew I was going to be telling a story about the sort of like desperate Cold War ops and the government, trying to sequester alien DNA in order to basically create shape-shifting super soldiers. And I was like, oh, okay, well, the Helix Project sounds like a dope name, but it's also not very searchable. And one of the major settings of the book is Area 51. And I was like, putting that at the top of the book does several things for me. One, it makes it far more searchable. And two, if it's on a shelf somewhere, it's going to be right there at the front of the rack. And it's going to be easy to look up. So it's a blessing and a curse, because typing in Area 51 : the Helix Project is an absolute bitch. It's annoying.
Yeah.
I will say, when I'm like promoting it, because it has the colon, my phone can't auto predict it. But I think it becomes a little bit more marketable. It's easier to look up, and I've definitely gotten a little bit of traction from folks who were not looking for the book and found it by happy coincidence.
Right. That's a great point though. Like when you're picking titles, and like you're the first person to mention this to me, like you want it to be something that you can find. Like you can't have like you want it to stick out, like you want it to be something that people will remember. Like I was talking to someone recently, like sometimes people have like these long ass titles that are like completely forgettable because some of the words like like they're not real, like they exist in the universe that's created in that book, but like it's not, you know, so it's like kind of meaningless.
Mhm.
But you want your book to stick out in terms of being something you can look up without a million other things showing up, with it, where it
Mhm.
would get lost in the shuffle. Like there's a lot of thought that needs to kind of be put into it.
For sure. Yeah, it's like there are two things that might be considered an artistic decision, and still are artistic decisions, that I think cater more toward the marketing and sales end of the book, and it is your title and your cover art.
Mhm.
And I've always prided myself on making sure that the cover art is always sort of metaphorically in leaning with what's happening in the book. Like it does represent an angle of the book and of the issue in question, but it's also got to be visually striking,
Yeah.
and it's got to pull the eye in. But the title, it does, it has to give you a not only a feeling, an atmosphere of what the book is going to be about in tandem with the cover, but it's got to be searchable. It's got to be something that somebody can, who is maybe interested in the genre that you're playing in or in the medium that you're in,
Mhm.
come upon it by circumstance. And yeah, I felt like it was pretty successful in that vein. Um, so yeah, that's where the Area 51 part came from.
That's cool. I like that you touched on like the covers, like you personally feeling like it requires that they kind of showcase something that is happening in the issue, you know, because I remember for me, like before I really got into collecting, I was, I don't know, maybe like 13 or 14. I forget at the time. But I went to Toys R Us and they still were still selling comics.
Mhm,
And I guess I think it was during like the World War Hulk event,
mhm,
and there was a Ghost Rider like a crossover, like a 2-issue crossover. And the first issue, I can't describe it now, but like it basically made me think, okay, Ghost Rider and Hulk are gonna fight. Like the cover's awesome. This is cool. And that does not happen at all throughout the entire book. Like the
mm,
last panel is them meeting each other.
mm.
And it's just like, all right, like you kind of pulled a fast one on me. It felt like a bait and switch almost. Um,
Yeah, dude, it's kind of obnoxious. Like I always hated when covers weren't like indicative of the book. And
mhm,
I despise the big two tactic of like, "No, we're gonna do Harley Quinn covers for the month, even though she's not in like any of these books." Excuse my French, I fucking hate that stuff. And don't get me wrong, there are like the speculator collector type that eat that shit up. I hate it. I think it
I-
takes a lot of the like artistic premise of creating a cover because for me, like aside from being a marketing device, the cover is also the reader's first exposure to the work. It's
yep.
gonna set a tone. It's going to begin to develop an atmosphere and it's going to begin the process of the reader asking themselves questions about the book, whether it's explicit or not. And so like for me, it's an opportunity like to not only make something physically cool, but like that is metaphorically resonant with what's happening in the book. Like somebody can look at that cover, and if they consider themselves like a sort of deep viewer, you can begin to piece together a little bit or begin to interpret a little bit about what the book is going to be about. Like
Mhm,
that cover for issue 5 that we brought up a couple times. Like the title of the cover is Bound by Genetics, and you have all of these like interesting little keys where you have these 3 main heads that are tied together by like these like fleshy vines and DNA, and then you have the protagonist Kent split into his human form and his alien form, and it's actually, if you look at the pose, it replicates the creation painting by Michelangelo, but instead of having God with Adam, it's Adam with Adam. So there's a very deliberate, like metaphorical purpose to that.
mhm.
So and then in the background of the cover, there are a bunch of neurons which represent connection, right? Like
Right.
signals being transmitted. So like for me, it is an opportunity to begin the storytelling as much as it is to have a cool piece of art that somebody's going to look at on the shelf, or maybe as they're scrolling through a page on the internet to try to convince them to check it out.
Right. And that, so like now that you touched on it again, and I'm looking at this cover for like the thousandth time, like when I said earlier that it was like kind of edgy, but like not in an annoying way. Like when you describe like all the things that are going on to it, like that's like the intricacy that I'm like that I was referring to. Because like, yeah, like you could look at it at first glance and be like, oh, okay, whatever, sure, it's just looks like some 90s whatever shit. Like there's like blood or whatever. Because I mean, first glance, I would have thought that this was blood,
Mhm.
and like it was trying to whatever, and it looks like you've got like death metal band like text here at the bottom, but like there's so much more to it than that,
Yeah.
you know so like that's what I mean. Like that's why I think I'm such a huge fan of that cover.
It's a
um
good cover, man. I really do adore that cover. I think that was like the first, that was, nah, maybe the second cover I fell in love with from the series, like it fell hard for, but
mhm.
there's something about the experience of me seeing that cover the first time when it was finished. And, man, like it just blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, when I first saw it, like I said, that was the campaign that I discovered your series with. So like that was the first image that I saw. Like I'm pretty sure that's the thumbnail for that campaign. So I was
Yep.
like, oh, okay, like this looks cool. What's this about? And then I'm like, I read a little bit, looked through some of the images. The art, is awesome. So I
Thanks,
was
man.
like, fuck it, I'm in. Like
Yeah,
as simple as that.
yeah, when Sam, who I've gushed about a little bit in this interview, did that cover, and he took over interiors from issue 5 on, and he was just like a game changer. Like when you find an artist that you click with creatively and is so in tuned about like what the little decisions are going to do to contribute to the storytelling, it is like a game changer. It changes the creative process in a big way. So if like, it's crazy because you can pull all that from that one singular image being the cover, and it's just like, I can't wait for you, and I can't wait for anybody who's watching this to read that issue and see what he's able to do inside, where, you know, the only intention is to tell story through sequential images.
Mm. So I mean, obviously we're here, we're talking about your campaign. Who is your like target audience? You know what I mean? Like who, if it's one of those, like if you're a fan of this, you like this kind of questions. Like what is that for the Helix Project?
So I hate cross pitching. I get why people do it because it builds like a sense of familiarity.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think it can come off as a little creatively deprived. So
Fair.
I don't tend to try to pitch it that way, to my detriment. Like as a business person, bad call. I will admit that.
Well,
But I
so I
will
mean,
say, I will tell you sort of where my inspirations come from on the book, and I think that will, you know, that is the close that will kind of speak to like, if you might like this, that kind of stuff, this is where
that
I'm pulling from.
that's
uh
fair.
the, Thematically speaking, I took a lot of inspiration from Dwayne McDuffie and his work through Milestone. There are a lot of these very sort of human and personal themes that resonate throughout this book. And I know one of the sort of constants for him was like this idea of identity. And that is certainly like the primary theme of our story and what we try to explore, particularly identity through the lens of loss, which is something that he also liked to play around with. When it comes down to tone and atmosphere, I've taken a lot of inspiration from the team of Brubaker and Phillips that we mentioned earlier, but also guys like Brian Hill. You know, his
I'm
work has
big
been,
fan of him.
he has been a massive influence on me, particularly American Carnage, which I would say is the last great Vertigo book we've ever gotten. Like,
Mm.
and I, not great in the sense like this is great. I mean great. Like it is upper echelon. Like if you want to learn how to tell a thriller, that is the comic that I point you towards. So I took a lot of inspiration from his work on that. Um, and I think that's a pretty good sort of space to be. When it comes to, yeah, I think that is a very good space for me to be in. When it comes to genre, I don't know if my genre influences fall anywhere in particular in comics, to be honest with you. I
Mhm.
think my genre influence mainly comes from my educational background and and a little bit more of a cumulative experience. Like I like the sci-fi that moreover uses sci-fi as a tool but doesn't use it as like a flavor piece. Like it's not indulgent. Like some of my favorite sci-fi movies are things like Arrival or Children of Men, where you take the circumstances given to you by the genre and you use that as a tool, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
telling a sci-fi story, um but the story isn't just sci-fi. It's a story about a child with identity issues looking to figure himself out in a world that doesn't want him, using sci-fi and the tools of sci-fi as a lens, and using this sort of metaphor that like DNA is effectively our physical identity. How can I extrapolate that a little bit more emotionally? um so yeah.
So okay, so two things from what you just said. One was my initial, like, well, with my question and your initial response, I think you're like kind of onto something, and I see like making comparisons like that as kind of a double-edged sword, in the sense that, you know, you do want some sort of familiarity. You want someone to be like, oh, well, okay, maybe this is up my alley, but at the same time, then maybe you set the wrong expectations, you know, or you like you run that risk at least.
I Oddly enough, I I think that readers are very forgiving, like even if it falls short. My thing is, and I don't, I try not to fault people for doing the cross pitching thing, because again, I understand it is familiarity particularly in branding and entertainment, is a really, really useful thing. I think for
Absolutely.
me, my creative sort of side of my brain tends to overwrite that, and I'm like, well, if I'm confident in what I'm doing, why am I going to pitch my product as this meets this? Because it's almost like saying, yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm this, but I'm not quite that. And I'm this, but I'm also not quite that. And so
Mm.
for me, it feels like half measures, you know? And sometimes I think it comes off as a little bit too bolsterous, you know? Sometimes you see really, really underdeveloped work where people are like, oh, it's like The Godfather meets Apocalypse Now. And it's just like, this is neither of those two things. And cannot compete, you know?
Yeah.
And so I also don't want to, you know, like I will wear my influences on my sleeve, certainly, but I'm not gonna like compare myself to Alan Moore or, you know, for the sake of being in keeping with that film discussion. I'm not gonna compare myself to like Francis Ford Coppola at his peak, you know.
Yeah.
But am I influenced by some of these things? Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's good to get influences from like multiple facets of like media or like different mediums, etc. Like I I think it only benefits you as a creator.
I agree. You know, I always say like comics are great because I mean, really honestly, if you're writing in any medium, you can pull influence from every other medium, but comics in particular because you have so much at your disposal in terms of technique and in terms of like the packaging, and not necessarily like the physical packaging of the book, but like the way you're packaging a story or an idea or a
Mhm.
concept. Like you can play with poetry, uh like that is shepherded by the sequential narrative. The sequential narrative itself can be the poetry, you know, right? Like a more visual sense.
Mhm.
You do need to be a solid descriptive writer if you're looking to be sort of the if you're looking to adopt the full script model, because the way in which you're describing something is going to change the interpretation of the artist. One, even if the reader isn't seeing it, like if I say if I say that you it's rainy, we're looking at a car, in the distance is a house, it's boring, right?
Yeah.
But if I say something like we're in the dead of a drowning night, led to the house by the singular, you know, brake light of a broken SUV, you know, or something like that. Like that was off the cuff, but that is going to establish tone for the artist, right?
Yeah.
Even though nobody else is reading that, they're immediately going to have a clearer picture in their head of what that's going to be. And that requires prose, that requires you to understand how to be descriptive. And there's a lot more that can be sort of elaborated upon that, but to keep myself from babbling, yeah, it is incredibly important. And I think, you know, the comparisons to film and to cinema are numerous, such that
Yeah.
a lot of people attempt to write comics as if they're writing a screenplay and don't realize that despite there being a decent amount of sort of symmetry between them, it's not one for one, you know. It's like some people do that to a fault. So I think it's all about finding that balance and understanding where you can pull from in order to establish your voice and your sort of creative signature.
That, yeah. I know that's kind of short to respond to everything that you just said, but I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, I think that that doesn't always get considered. You know, when people go into making comics or something, like they think, okay, comics are comics, and it's always got to be, you know, just about that. You don't get influenced by movies. You don't have to figure out how to, you know, write prose, like you said, because you have to make it so that the artist figures out what like what you're seeing in your head, because only you can see that.
Mhm.
So you have to figure out how to put it into words in an appropriate way that conveys the message that you're aiming for. And I think that that is a lot easier said than done. I know that I am not capable of it personally. I'm sure it's something that you can practice, but yeah, I think it's an overlooked detail. People probably think like, oh, I'd rather write comics because it's easier than writing a real book. But like, you still kind of have to write you almost still have to write a real book.
Listen, man. I mean, I've played in a lot of different spaces. Like I have prose work that's sort of in limbo at larger publishers right now. I've written screenplays that have been looked at by people in the film industry and gotten traction. Writing comics well is harder than anything I've ever played around in, like bar none. Because I think it's difficult because I actually think that there's a kind of low bar, unfortunately, in comics for quality. Like you can kind of make a C- thing and people will think it's amazing, because there's not as because comics aren't as like affluent of a medium as like
Mhm.
film or prose or whatever. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
but like to be great, to be a really great comic book writer, I think it is a ridiculous mastery of craft because you have to be so good at what you do and so clear at what you do, but also find the balance of leaving enough room for interpretation so that the artist can do their thing. It's really, really unique. Like writing comics is incredibly unique, and I've never talked to anybody worth their salt that doesn't acknowledge just how different it is. It's like, I brought up earlier that a lot of people will write their comic as if it's a screenplay and not really
Mm.
understand that the rhythmic difference of comics is out of this world. Like your functional unit in a comic book is a panel. Your functional unit in film is a scene. A scene,
Yeah.
is like what? Tens of thousands, if not like hundreds of thousands of frames
Right.
in versus one singular image. So you have to think about the way you're impacting the reader based on that panel on its own, in the context of a sequence, in the context of a page, the spread, and then the story overall. um I think more so than any other medium, comics is probably the most like contextual art form in that way. And I always like I always think that like one of the things that helps me write comics the most is that like I played a lot of music when I was younger. I played guitar professionally when I was in college and like late high school, because I think about comics very rhythmically and how like rhythm in music is going to like change somebody's perception of the music. Like there is a musicality to comics. Yeah, hope I didn't go off the rails there.
That's no, that's interesting because I've never heard that before. So I'm like especially curious to hear like what more you have to say on that subject, if anything.
Well, I think that I mean, so because like I said, you have such a refined amount of space that you have to be very deliberate with the way that you are visually representing the scene. And then again, I mean, one in a syllabalistic sense, like the way somebody's going to be reading something internally is going to change the speed of which they are going through the page. But also like, so for example, once once you get into issue 3, actually, I think the first page of issue 3 is very rhythmic, of the Helix Project. And the way that the panels are shaped, and the way the page is structured, they're sort of floating widescreen panels at various distances, with like these deep black gutters. And I was very deliberate with like the rhythm of the words for the narration. And I feel like that page, you could not have actually read anything from the Helix Project and read that page and been like, oh my God, I've never seen somebody driving a taxi and felt more anxious than right now. Because there is that rhythmic value. It's like staccato, 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 legato, and you're just going to sit with this feeling for a minute before you turn the page. Even though there's nothing super threatening on the page, and a lot of
Right.
it is rhythmic value.
I'm not gonna lie, I opened it up just to see because I didn't get here yet, and I was like, all right, let's see if I can pick up on what he's saying. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
man.
think you're on to something.
Yeah, absolutely. Like hot take, I think most dialogue in comics is really bad because people don't really acknowledge that when it comes to comics, it's harder than writing for film, because in film, ultimately, if you make people sound like people, you're pretty good. And the thing that there are certain sort of screenwriters that take things to the next level because they're able to intensify that. The thing about comics is you're not actually you don't have the time or the space to make people sound like real people. You have to trick the reader into making their sort of internal voice sound like a real person, right? You have to trick them into thinking that this is what a real person sounds like.
Right.
Because you really don't have the time or the space to do it. And then also, if you're taking it that step further and you're like, okay, how is like the rhythmic value of this caption box or this series of caption boxes assisting in the scene, then that's even more of a constraint, I think. And ultimately, if you pull it off and you do it well, it ultimately makes the finished product that much better. And it's going to be something that no one else is going to notice but you. But it's going to be one of those things that carries someone through kind of subconsciously. And I think a lot of the techniques, a lot of the more advanced techniques in any creative field are going to be the things that most people aren't really going to be able to sit there and point out. You know what I mean? Like, nobody's going to read that first page and be like, this guy is manipulating the speed that I'm reading this page at. You know?
Yeah, no, for sure. That's so funny. Yeah. Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, man. So yeah, that's always my thing. I always say comics are like the jazz of literature in like every sense. Like, one, because ironically, comics and jazz are like the only two things that America can claim that they created. But also, you look at like the shape of the panel, the size of the panel, what's being shown in the panel, what that sequence is like. It is very jazz-like, because sometimes, you know, the cool thing about jazz is that it's able to make something sound great, even though not everything is going to be in the same key, right? You might have like a couple measures of music in jazz, and you'll have as many keys as you have measures, but the way you're able to sort of jigsaw all of these things together makes something that sounds complete and is attractive to the ear. And comics visually are very much the same thing. You can take things that normally kind of don't mesh well together, but if you can figure out how to design the page and how to lay it out, you can create something that's like greater than the sum of its parts in a big bad way.
Yeah, for sure. That's it's a really interesting analogy. I've never, it's like, I mean, as far as music and comics go, I think you might be the first person to ever bring that up in general. But I think that's a really quality analogy. I'm intrigued by that perspective. I don't have like a musical background personally. I honestly, I mostly don't know shit about music. I just listen to it and have a good time. But
it's, you know, it's something you think about. Like, music is consumed by pretty much everybody, and you don't think about the way you're kind of being manipulated based on what's technically going on in the music, but you are, you know? So, and that's very, very much because comics is this like, comics is kind of like in the middle of this massive Venn diagram with all of these different art forms. And so it very much falls within, you know, that boundary of like, you're kind of, particularly because there's no sound, there's no, I mean, there's physical touch from reading the book, but there's no like sensation. You have to trick somebody into believing that those things are there to a degree, you know?
yeah,
Like, so yeah, comics are fucking cool.
I couldn't agree more. That's awesome. That's, yeah, I mean, you really bring up a lot of like good points that I personally have never considered, but I'm sure plenty of other people wouldn't also. Like, you, I mean, I don't want to just regurgitate what you're saying, but you really don't, like, the only sensation you're getting is like it's strictly visual, and that's it. You have to sell everything else. And I know, like I said, I've never thought of it. That's something that has been completely overlooked. Um, that's it's fascinating.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and you know what? If anybody watching this or listening to this likes that take, I put that same kind of weird thoughtfulness into the act of creating the comic always. And it's certainly like a skill or a way of executing that has evolved over the course of the series, which is why like I'm very excited for even you, Dan, just to like get to that 5th issue and to be like, wow, this is an experience. Like, and it is not that it's wholly different from where I started, but you can see like the depth and the evolution of the craft on display as you continue on throughout the series. Because like I said, and I said to you when we met in Baltimore, I always say my first shit is my worst shit. And I'm very proud of it. I think comics in general, not just indie comics, I think it's a very high floor. But because of that, I think that also made me responsible and keeps me hungry to raise the ceiling and to keep, you know, bringing that up a notch, to the point where, you know, I feel confident that by issues 5 and 6, like I think that this book can compete with almost anybody on the shelves.
That's awesome. I can't wait to read it and find out for myself if you really can.
You know, I expect nothing but honesty, Dan.
I will give it to you. I will. I genuinely try to pride myself on being honest. I'm not a huge fan of blowing smoke up people's asses. Like I know that kind of like might sound like what I do here, but like I like a lot of shit and I like talking about how much I like it. So like that's just it's how I roll.
Amen. That's what makes life interesting sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's comics are very unique. And I get asked the question all the time, like whether it's family or people I meet at conventions, they're like, why comics? And it's always like, it always caters to this idea that like, well, why would I go write prose or write a screenplay or write poetry when I can do it all right here? Like I can do all of it right here. And that's unique, man. That's different.
Yeah.
And it's so underappreciated. Like comics, it's funny because when people talk about comics, they talk about comics like it's a genre, but it's an entire medium that is on par with film or prose or poetry or whatever, you know, and like the general public doesn't look at it that way, which I think is insane, because like the reason that the comic book greats have stuck out and have become so evergreen within comics are because those are the people that recognize the capacity to which comics can be like a higher level of storytelling. There's a reason where you like why that generation of like of those like Vertigo writers and artists who changed everything we understand about comics have stuck. And it's because they understood like not that they don't need to go do those other things, because there's something fulfilling in and of being able to play in those spaces, but they're like, I can bring those things in and I can do something that the, you know, the Stanleys and the, you know, the Jack Kirby's and the, you know, like the originators of the medium, I can do things that they weren't even thinking about, or things that they didn't even think capable. You know, like you had guys like Kirby used collage in those early comics. Like I remember reading Lee and Kirby's Fantastic Four and seeing the first time he renders Galactus's hideout and thinking that, because I was reading it digitally on Marvel Unlimited, I was like, oh, it's a glitch. Like I just turn on this random page, and that's where you begin to see those really interesting ideas where he's using collage to totally disorient you. You know, you go from that traditional big bold Jack Kirby art into collage, and you legitimately feel like you're entering another dimension as the Fantastic Four are unable to get there. You know, like that's cool. You don't really get that anywhere else.
Yeah, no, I mean that's all valid. You said something that I was gonna expand on and I lost that train of thought again. My brain's been elsewhere, but
Dude,
but anyway,
no worries.
yes, great points. I'm really fascinated by like your take on all of this stuff, honestly, like on like a slightly more like personal level. Like I really think a lot of the stuff that you have to say is like super interesting.
Thanks,
And like that that does carry over from like our conversations at Baltimore. Like I said it then, but like I feel like I stopped at your table like 10 fucking times, like throughout the weekend. Um, but I mean, yeah, it was a good conversation. Like I feel like you bring a lot of like interesting perspective to the medium as a whole. Oh, that's what it was about comics being a medium versus just a genre. Yeah,
Mhm.
I like what maybe it's because I personally like read comics, enjoy them, and I'm like, neck deep in this shit in terms of like being in the hobby. But like I've always viewed it as its own medium. So like it's baffling to me that that's not the consensus.
I think it's because, you know, comics as a medium has failed to insert itself into our culture. Um, and therefore because it's looked at as a much smaller thing, people think of it as a genre, which is unfortunate. I think there's something very significant about how ubiquitous manga is in Japanese culture, wherein like there's a lot of high art storytelling that has traversed the globe, but also like there's manga for everything. There's tennis manga, there's
Mhm.
cooking manga, there's fishing manga, there's, I mean, clearly what is sort of um become popularized globally is that sort of shonen style action
Mhm.
fighting manga with like you win because friendship. But nonetheless, like manga as a medium, as Eastern comics have managed to become like a presiding form of entertainment throughout
Yeah.
their culture, and it's it's propagated to such a degree that like I mean I could be wrong. Somebody feel free to correct me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure manga outsells American comics in the US. Like in the US, you have one of the only American art forms ever to be created getting outpaced by an international, but what is effectively like an international equivalent of that same art form,
Yeah.
which like not to say that there aren't some incredible stories in manga because it's so widespread and it's equally as impressive, but that's crazy to me that comics haven't quite put themselves on that not a pedestal, but just the fact that comics haven't really controlled their image.
Mhm.
And I think it's a larger problem that the industry has that's indicative of like major issues. And I think it's actually going to be a lot harder for the industry to sort of come back from now that there's so much competition for not only the entertainment dollar, but the time that people spend in entertainment, in a world
Yeah.
where you can get a Netflix account for $12 and you could literally be watching something every minute of every day for that entire month, versus, you buy a comic now for $5, it's printed on newspaper print and you get 20 pages with like 8 to 12 pages of ads. And now like that's not to be said that there isn't value in the fact that comic books, because I've obviously talked about how much I adore comics and how
Yeah.
beautiful the art form is and how special it is that you're merging all of these different sort of art forms into one thing. But you think about it in terms of a product and it doesn't compete super well. And I think, you know, now that there is all that competition, it's going to be a much steeper uphill battle to try to get it to that point where you have a wider audience that's interested in the medium beyond like the growth of the audience that's naturally going to happen because the population, of the planet is increasing.
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit too proportionally scalar and not like the population's increasing this much and like comics are just getting so good and so like permeable within entertainment that like the popularity of comics are going up even higher. It's a little bit too leveled and yeah, man, I think it's partly the responsibility. I mean, it's a failing on these larger companies for sure, no doubt. But I think
Yeah.
now that we know that they're not going to do the work, the creators and the fans are the ones that have to be like, hey, like I know you love um I know you love the Maltese Falcon, but why don't you come check out Criminal by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips? Like, here you go. You know, and it's weird because it almost asks too much of the little guy, but like the big guy's not going to do it.
Right.
Straight up.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
A lot of takes tonight. A lot of takes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but this is good. This is the kind of shit that I enjoy. I mean, I haven't. I feel like a lot of times I'm just letting you kind of just share everything, and I'm just kind of sitting here like I don't have a ton of input, but like I don't think that's what I enjoy about like doing something like this, you know, having these kinds of conversations, hearing perspectives that I've never in my life heard before that are like kind of opening my mind to certain things. It's cool, man. It's really cool.
You know, I appreciate that you enjoy them, man. You know, yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think I have too much to say.
Uh I understand. I get like generally I feel like I'm a man of few words, but at the same time, like sometimes I just word vomit and it just doesn't stop.
Hey, if it's any consolation, I enjoyed the 10 trips you took to my table over Baltimore Comic-Con. So I had a good time. And good people are not always the easiest commodity to come by. So, you know,
Yeah,
worked for me just as much as it worked for you, man.
yeah, for sure. Um, so all right, I feel like we almost got off topic, but not really because it's still all comics. But like we're here talking about the Helix Project, like number 6. I'm excited. I got like this. I have the pile like sitting in front of me now of these books. I'm like, fuck. Like I kind of want to read them now.
You
I
should.
kind of want to wait. I'm
Listen,
very conflicted.
I'm not saying I would be really happy if you caught up tonight after we ended this interview, but
You wouldn't be
you know,
sad about it.
no, yeah, it certainly would not aggrieve me to hear that you got to the end of the books and are ready for issue 6. But yeah, man, I mean, this project has meant like so much to me, and I've gotten to grow so much, and I've got to work with a bunch of talented people who, I mean, they just make me look better. Like they're so good at what they do, and I'm so grateful. So you know, quick shout out to the team. Interiors and original cover by Samuel Iwunze, this like absolute like creative storytelling juggernaut from Nigeria. Actually, as we speak, I don't know if I mentioned this on an interview, but we're doing our best to try to get Sam out to come do some conventions with me at the end of the summer and into the fall. So fingers crossed, going to need everybody's sort of thoughts and vibes on trying to get that accomplished. That's going to be a big undertaking,
Cool.
but I only do this and I only take on all of that extra struggle because the guy's that freaking good.
Yeah.
And I want people to be able to meet him and experience more of his artwork. Colors by Marcio Freire, who also has done the secret cover, the C cover for both issues 5 and 6, which are beautiful pieces. And his interior color work is just out of this world and only gotten better as the series has gone on. I said it on Twitter the other day, and I truly do believe that a great colorist is the hardest thing to come by on a creative team in comics. Truly, like and this guy is just like versatile and potent and understands how colors are going to ultimately play into telling a story. And then we have Taylor Esposito on letters, who congrats to him, just pulled away a Ringo and a Tripwire award this year. And he was like a major not to make this like an espionage podcast, but he was like a major target for me. When it came to creating comics, one of the biggest pieces of advice I'd heard was that one of the things that professionals will look for is the quality of the lettering, because if you skimp on lettering, it shows that your attention to detail is low, and that you know, you don't have an eye for like the consistency of which you need to have the sort of marker of talent throughout your creative team,
Yeah.
because it's the first thing that people skimp on. And so my first thing was like, I need to find somebody who has done well in a lot of different spaces and has that versatility. And fortunately we landed Taylor. And then, of course, we have Adrian Bonilla, who is this incredible artist out of Spain, who I think is probably going to be the second coming of David Mazzucchelli, who has been doing the variant covers for the Helix Project from day one. And I look forward to doing more with him in the future as well. And then we actually have a couple other variant cover artists for issue 6. Seth Adams, who is somebody who's worked with larger companies like Marvel and Dynamite and has blessed me with an absolutely beautiful cover that you guys can unlock by backing the Kickstarter. I think it's like if we hit 9K, we'll unlock his cover and you'll be able to see beyond the blurry image of it on the Kickstarter. That guy is just like one of the sweetest people I've ever worked with, and is incredibly humble given like where he's been and what he's done in the industry, and just like is very thoughtful in his approach creatively, and is somebody who is, I think, evidently very meticulous about the creative process. I appreciate that, and I appreciate him as a human being. And then we got another secret cover, and I'm not going to tell you guys that much about it until it drops, but it's done by Gary Deslauriers, who's a painter based out of Rhode Island. So we've got a lot of cool things. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate my team. They're the best.
That's awesome, and I'm really glad that you took a moment to shout them out. I think that speaks volumes to like your character personally. I think it speaks volumes to how much you value them as a team, you know, as your peers, as your, I don't know, coworkers, whatever you want to call it. Like,
They're the best, man. I mean, like really, you know, when I think when a storyteller writes something, you hope that they care about it. And in this case, I really do care about this story because it was me trying to work through a lot of sort of personally difficult ideas and challenges in that period of my life. And for me to hand that to another human being who is now going to have an effect on how this personal expression is going to be constructed or viewed by other people, that's important. And I've been really, really lucky to work, particularly so early on in my career. But at any given time, I've been lucky to find people that are so good at what they do and so intuitive that they're able to help me make something that I'm proud of and is greater than something I ever could have done on my own. Yeah, man, like I have to shout them out. It's compulsory because I wouldn't get to do what I'm doing without them. For without like being too corny, like I would be nothing, you know?
right. I know that's awesome. I think it, like I said, it speaks to your character as a creator and just as a person.
Thanks, man.
So yeah, no, I'm a big fan of that energy. So I mean, you mentioned that was it 9K was a stretch goal. So I mean, where are we at right now? Do you know roughly?
So, of course, so one thing anybody watching this will learn is that when a comic book creator or anyone is really running a Kickstarter, you constantly have the page open because you're so frantic. So we're near the end of day 2. I am $4 away from 5,000, which puts us at 76% of our goal. So hopefully we'll cross that threshold tonight. But we have actually, I had a backer goal of wanting to get 80 backers in the first 48 hours, which we did, which means we are now going to be printing a second print, a new edition of issue 2, similar to what we did with issue 1. So it's going to have a brand new cover, and it's going to have 4 extra pages of behind the scenes material. And this cover is actually going to have a spot gloss to it, whereas the second printing of issue 1 had a massive emboss. The funding goal is $6,500. We just launched yesterday, so we're, like I said, 76% of the way there. But my personal goal is to break 10. I think it's gonna be a real rite of passage for me because I've been in the 8,000 to 8,500 range for my last 2 campaigns.
Okay.
And I'm kind of ready to take that next leap. So I really want to break 10K on this one. We've got a bunch of really cool stretch goals to incentivize getting there. One being at $8,000, anybody that has a tier with an art print in it, their art print's going to get upgraded to a metallic foil, similar to the one that Dan has behind him there,
Nice.
for free. because I'm a bad businessman and I'm not good at making money. And $9,000 will unlock that Seth Adams variant cover, which is an absolute stunner. And actually, if you go check out the campaign beneath the stretch goals, you'll be able to see some examples of Seth's incredible artwork and a little blurred out sort of thumbnail of his cover that he did for us. And at 10 grand, I'm going to upgrade the A cover to a wraparound cover for free.
Damn.
Because like I said, I'm not good at making money, even though I'm just like, yeah, give me to this mark. It's slowly for bragging. It's actually just for bragging rights. But all jokes aside, the nice thing is that putting us in that position would give me a lot of momentum moving forward and being able to like keep production as steady as possible, starting work on things early. For anybody that has never like heard me in an interview or heard me talk about making comics in general, I don't pay myself anything. Like I actually just had a conversation with my artist Sam where I was just like, yeah, dude, you technically make more from these Kickstarters than I do because I'm paying you from the Kickstarter. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't pocket any of the money. Like the money goes right into making more books, you know, because I want to continue to create and I see that as my route to doing it as long as I can sustain that. So the better we do, the more comics I get to make and the more talented artists I get to work with and give work, which is fantastic. And I don't know, I was going to joke, kind of half joke that at 12K, maybe I'd get the A cover tattooed of the A cover to issue 6 tattooed on my body, which I'm all about, man. Like, I mean, you saw me at the show. I don't know if I was like wearing a short sleeve shirt, but I'm pretty tatted. So
Yeah.
I'm game, man. Like this is no hyperbole.
So that's at 12K.
Maybe I see once we start breaking more stretch goals, we'll be able to unveil more of that. But yeah, maybe at 12K, I'd be game to get that tattoo at 12 grand. Fuck yeah.
That'd be hilarious. That'd be pretty fucking epic, honestly.
Yeah, and honestly, it'd be a sick tattoo. So I'm not mad
Yeah,
about it.
for sure. So one thing you just talked about was kind of like your sustainability and your ability to keep putting these books out. And I mean, you said when I asked you earlier that you started writing this in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's just the writing process. Like that wasn't like when did your first campaign launch?
I think that was October of 2020. And then the first issue I physically had in hand by the middle of January of 2021. So it's been 2 years since the first issue was published. And yeah, I mean, it's been, you know, when you work in comics, there's so many cogs in the machine, and oftentimes those cogs can get a little bit gunked up in terms of the process and things slow down. And that's what happened. But we've kept a pretty solid pace, I think, for one, somebody who's never done this before. And two, for an indie comic, you know, you have some guys that might do like 1 campaign a year. I've done 6.
So
you know?
that's exactly what I was going to touch on. Like you started writing this in 2020. I mean, you did get your campaign rolled off right before the end of the year, but still like 2023 just started. So it's basically 2 years and you're already working on your 6th book. I mean, you've been working on, but like, you know what I mean? Like the 6th one is around the corner now. And like you said, like some people, and this is not, you know, to disparage anyone, like, you know, shit happens, work at your own pace. Everyone has jobs and shit. Like, I totally understand. But I just, for you, like, it's remarkable in comparison that you've been able to put 5 books out already and you have the 6th one on the way, where sometimes some people are, you know, 2 books in the last year and a half, 2 years, whatever the case is.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've done my best to try to make everything accessible, you know, and to, because it's hard. It is hard reading comics on a monthly basis. Like, no questions. Like there have been times where I've read something like, oh, what the hell happened in the last one? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? So, you know, I understand. And so I try to make the end of every issue memorable. You know, I mean, you got to the end of issue 2. I think it's pretty damn memorable.
yeah.
And also knowing that I'm not going to be able to produce fast enough to be a monthly comic because of just like the structure of being independent.
Of course.
I'm going to try to produce higher and higher quality every time and do it, you know, on a solid schedule. And, you know, fortunately, I think given some setbacks in terms of time, I think we've done that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and in fairness to you, I feel like some of those, not that I know personally, but like I feel like a lot of those setbacks are ones that like everyone has been kind of dealing with over the last, I don't know, 6, 8 months to a year, you know. So like everyone's kind of felt those, like whether it's printer issues or shipping issues or supply chain that everybody keeps talking about, like whatever it is, like everyone has been feeling those issues. So it's not something on your end
Mhm.
specifically.
And the thing is, like, not to like discourage from anybody else, but one, I've never had like I've never had a crazy delay on fulfillment because of supply chain issues, and also like this on my sixth campaign. This is my sixth one. This is the first time I'm increasing my prices, and I've increased them by $1. Like you can this campaign, like you can get a 32-page comic with, as you can feel, very high print quality, for $7. Like
And that's,
Kickstarters aren't doing that, and it's
yeah,
because I know what it's like to be a consumer. And I understand I could probably make more money. And a lot of people do go into Kickstarters acknowledging they're going to spend more because these are all independent ventures.
yeah,
And I've always been of the mind that I want to deliver high quality story, a high quality reading experience as a high quality product. And so the higher we can scale it, the more volume we can sell, the easier it is for me to keep those prices so low. Because like I said, I remember what it was like just being the consumer, and I still buy comics on a monthly basis, and it's not cheap.
no,
So, you know, I want to deliver value on every angle, you know,
yeah,
emotionally and personally when you're reading the book, but also, you know, for your entertainment dollar, because it's expensive to stay entertained nowadays, you know?
yeah, yeah, it is. But yeah, no, that $7 price point is, considering the current market, like that's pretty insane. Like that's a great value, and you don't see it very often at all. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that's charging less than 10.
Mhm.
Um,
For a 20
so I
page
mean,
book.
so yeah, and I mean, shit. I mean, if that's not a selling point in itself, like it's just $7. You know, you're getting a high quality single issue. Yeah, if you need to catch up, you spend a little more, but even then, like there's value in that as well. It's not, you know, I haven't looked at the tiers specifically. I'm not gonna lie to you, I haven't backed it yet, but I promise I will. I just, it's only been 2 days. Like I procrastinate, but I'll get there. Um, but yeah, no, I haven't looked at the tiers, so I don't know the exact prices off the top of my head. But I mean, the 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 value that I paid for the 5 issues that I got with the catch up tier, I thought that, you know, I thought that the price was great. I don't remember specifically what it was, but it was, I got what I paid for. Like, you know what I mean? Like I got my money's worth. Like the value was there.
Hmm.
So I am confident that if you as a potential future backer want to get all 6 issues, that your money will be well spent. Like I said earlier, I read the first 2 issues. I like what's going on. I'm really curious to see where it goes, and I don't. I think you will too. Um, yeah, it just, the book is good, and I recommend it.
Thanks, man. I really do appreciate the vote of confidence, and you know, like I said, I do my best to make the material accessible. You know, you could get all the books like digitally if you're kind of strapped and you want to know what's going on. And it includes 2 versions of issue 1, the second one that has all that extra behind the scenes stuff. You can get all that for $25. Like I think that's a pretty good bargain. That's over like 160 pages of material.
I
It's
say
not
yeah,
that,
and I mean, in
you know.
general, I think a PDF is usually priced at like $5. So if you're getting 6 for
7
20,
technically.
oh yeah, right. Sorry. Uh, but yeah, like if you're getting all that for 25, like that's a pretty nice discount. So I mean, there's no, if you're interested, like there's no reason, even if you just go digital.
Yeah, and just to give people numbers, if you want your physical copies to collect, um, you can get for $40, you can get the entire series and and you get all of those digital issues if you're the type that just wants to bag and board it and keep it safe. Like, it's not that bad. Like I said, I do my best to keep it affordable and make sure that people feel like you feel, in that they're getting more value even than what they're paying for it. Because I think that's important, you know, to setting up that sort of relationship for me as a creative person and somebody who's trying to distill that into a creative product. I want people to know that I'm looking out for the consumer and that I want to deliver value as best as I can. Like you know, I think that is, it's very much like an ethical concern of mine as somebody who's putting this stuff out. And because comics are not necessarily a super thriving medium compared to other entertainment, I do take it upon myself to give people that type of value, to the best of my ability, sometimes to my own, to my own deficit, you know, detriment, I should say.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's all I had. So I mean, that's we talked about way more than I expected to in the best way possible. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was all the questions that I had personally. Like, I know that I'm already a backer, so whatever. I'm not trying to sound like a shill, but like, I think what you've said would be enough to sell me had I not previously backed or had I not been aware of your book prior.
Thanks, man.
So hopefully that translates to other people watching this. And I'm really excited. I appreciate you again for coming on. Is there anything that you want to put out there, announce, just make sure everyone's aware of before we sign this thing off?
Consider checking out the Kickstarter. If you're not in the most financially liquid position, consider sharing it with people that you think might check it out. It really, when it comes to this stuff, like these grassroots movements are sometimes the difference between life and death. And you know, I hope if anything, I've been able to convince people that I care about what I do and that I want to make something that is great and I want to be great as a storyteller. And you know, what I'm asking is for the opportunity to do that and to entertain you and to connect with you as a human being through story. And you know, if anybody's watching this, I'm sure there'll be a link in the description to the Kickstarter. Check it out.
Absolutely.
Look at the art. And if it doesn't look enticing, you're more than welcome to like cold call DM me and be like, this looks like shit. I open that door confidently because I don't think you will feel that way. And if you do, you know, I made my bed, I'll sleep in it. But you know, you get a digestible story, you know, it has a beginning, middle, and end. It's not going to crap out somewhere. You're not going to be in a position where you don't actually get to find out the ending because I don't know, I've never fulfilled the Kickstarter and reallocated the money in all the wrong places, and now I can't make the book. I've done this 5 times before. And I pride myself on the sort of ethics of being somebody that is delivering a product, whether it is creative or not. But because it is creative and because it is something I care about deeply and has a piece of me in it, I take exponentially more care to make sure that it gets to you and that it is something that is worth your time, energy, and money. And I'm grateful to be here, man. Like, Dan, thank you for having me. Thank you for taking a risk and supporting my story, and for feeling so comfortable with being a part of me trying to spread the word and tell people about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm happy to. So real quick before we go, where can we find you on social media if anyone wants to DM you and tell you that the book is shit or whatever the case is?
Do it. Yeah, so I'm sure that there'll probably be a link to that in the description as well. But if you're listening to this and you're like, I need it now, you can find me at Twitter, at PWatchPress. It's Pocket Watch Press, but shortened, because character limitations. You can find me on Instagram at Pocket Watch Press, and then facebook.com/pocketwatchpress2020. But if you type in Pocket Watch Press, it should come up. And yeah, I'm probably the most active on Twitter, but I try to get stuff out there, whether it's art or little process things. If you happen to check me out on social media, there's a link tree in there where you can sign up for my newsletter, which is a great way to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing. You get behind the scenes looks at some of the production, some of the artwork. Every once in a while, I'll walk you through step by step, like from the phase of the script all the way to the finished art, you know, not limited to, but containing things as far as showing you rough pencils, the emails that I send to the artist after the rough pencils with the notes, to the adjusted, and then to the inks, and so on and so forth. You get to see a piece of the entire creative process, sometimes kind of annotated and discussed by me. So if you are a perspective, or what's someone looking for? If you are an aspiring creator, I think it's a great resource. If you are a fan who just loves comics and is interested in how the sauce is made, I think it is also a great resource. And you get to stay up to date with everything I'm doing, so you'll know first about conventions, appearances, Kickstarters, new initiatives. I do giveaways also, like anywhere between quarterly to trimesterly. So
Who
be
doesn't
on the
love free
lookout for
shit?
that. If anybody watches this, I don't know when this will be posted, but I have 2 signings at the end of the month. One signing in East Hartford, Connecticut at Comics and Collectibles ETC. And then on the 28th, I was graciously invited by the folks at Everyone Comics in Queens, in Long Island City, Queens, New York, to sign during their Lunar New Year festival. And there would be a bunch of really talented artists out there. So if you don't want to go just for me, I think that gives you all the more the reason. And yeah, man, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe to Dan, of course.
Thank you for plugging me right at the end too. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That's awesome. All right, man. It was awesome chatting with you. This was really cool. You're more than welcome back anytime, you know,
Thanks.
whenever your future works are ready to be announced and all that. I really appreciate talking to you. And yeah, with that said, I'm Paperback Dan, and I will see you guys later.